Elira Viramont pressed her palms into the silver blooms and let them burn. The wolfsbane grew in clusters along the marsh's black edge, luminous against the mud, beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, precise and indifferent to the flesh it opens. She had learned years ago not to flinch. The poison had mapped itself into her hands by now, a language of scars that traced every stem she'd ever cut, every fibre she'd ever braided. She worked quickly in the dark before dawn, her knife moving close to the roots where the stalks were thickest, her breath visible in the cold air above the ash fen. 5 shirts complete, 1 left unfinished, 9 years of silence held between her teeth like a stone. She wrapped the fresh stems in oilcloth, tucked them deep inside her rough-spun satchel, and slipped back through the postern gate before the watch changed. The fortress swallowed her. It always did. In Dreadmoor, servants were shadows, and Ash was the thinnest shadow of all, a mute girl with no surname, no history, no voice worth listening for. In the laundry cellars, where steam clung to the walls and the light barely reached, Elira pulled the half-finished shirt from its hiding place beneath a loose hearthstone. The fibres bit into her cracked fingertips as she braided them, toxic and silver-bright. She did not stop. She had never stopped. Her brothers were wolves running somewhere beyond these walls, and every stitch was a syllable of the only promise she could keep. A younger servant, Marin, barely 16, wandered too close. Elira knocked a basket sideways with her knee, sending linens across the wet floor. Now Marin yelped, scrambled to gather them. By the time she looked up, the shirt was gone, the satchel closed, and Ash was wringing sheets with an expression that invited nothing. That evening, the great hall roared with firelight and voices. Elira moved between the tables carrying wine, invisible in the way she had perfected. Eyes down, steps measured, presence erased. Kyle Draven sat at the high table and stopped breathing. The scent hit him like a hand against his chest. Not perfume, not anything nameable. Something beneath scent, something older, woven into the marrow of what he was. His fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. His amber eyes swept the hall, hunting. A goblet slipped from a noble's careless hand. Elira caught it. Loss of thought, pure reflex, and Kyle's hand closed over hers before either of them understood why. A stillness. Her silver-grey eyes lifted to his for exactly 1 breath. He saw the scars. He saw the silence. He saw something behind her gaze that he could not name and could not look away from. She withdrew her hand. She bowed. She disappeared into the crowd. Later, in a torch-lit corridor, Kyle summoned the servant called Ash and asked for her name. She stood before him with her hands folded over her scarred wrists and said nothing. He studied her face the way a man studies a locked door behind which something is burning. That night, wolves howled in the outer courtyard. Elira knelt alone in her hidden chamber and laid out 5 completed shirts across the cold stone floor. The 6th lay in her lap, unfinished, waiting. She pressed her poisoned hands together and held her silence like a prayer. Then the black carriage came through the iron gates under a sky that had forgotten the sun. Thunder rolled across the Ashford marshes like a drumbeat for something ancient, and the horses that pulled the carriage were wrong. Too still-eyed, too silent, their hooves striking the volcanic stone without echo. Elira knew before the door opened. She knew by the way the air in the courtyard thickened, by the way the torches guttered sideways as if flinching. She knelt with the other servants on the wet stone, head bowed, hands pressed flat against her thighs to hide their trembling. Queen Verith descended from the carriage like a blade being unsheathed, emerald silk layered over black, dark metal pins catching no light. Now she moved through the kneeling rows with the unhurried precision of someone surveying territory she had already claimed in her mind. She stopped before Elira. The pause lasted only a moment, a breath, a heartbeat, but Elira felt it like a hand closing around her throat. She did not look up. She did not need to. She felt Verith's gaze trace the line of her scars, find the silver in her downcast eyes, and no. The Queen's silk hem whispered against the stone as she moved on. She said nothing. She didn't need to. That evening, Verith sat at Kyle's right hand in the great hall and spoke of borders, of alliances between kingdoms that bled alone, of the loneliness that hollowed out strong rulers from within. Her voice carried the warmth of a hearth fire, the kind that burned too evenly, too perfectly to be natural. That Kyle listened with his jaw tight and his wine untouched. Then he drank. Vireth watched him swallow with the patience of someone who understood that poison was most effective when it tasted like comfort. Elira saw the moment Kyle's amber eyes dulled, just slightly, just at the edges, like gold tarnishing in real time. She was clearing plates when Vareth passed behind her, and her body betrayed her. A flinch, small, involuntary, the kind that lives in the spine before the mind can intervene. Kyle saw it. His gaze followed the trajectory, from Ash to Vareth and back, and something shifted behind his expression. Not understanding. Not yet. But the beginning of a question that had teeth. Later he found Elira in the corridor outside the kitchens. Wolfsbane threads had slipped from her satchel, and she was on her knees gathering them with hands that shook from more than cold. Kyle crouched beside her without announcement, his cloak pooling on the stone, and picked up a silver-green strand between his fingers. "This is Wolfsbane." Not a question, his voice low, close. "Why does a servant carry poison?" Elira took the thread from his hand without touching his skin. She shook her head. He offered her safer quarters, a room near his own guard. Protection. She signed her refusal with both hands. "No, no, no," and stepped back before his reaching fingers could find hers. The look on his face when she pulled away was something she would carry like a wound. That night, Elira returned to her hidden chamber and found the fifth shirt moved. Not taken, moved. Shifted 3 inches to the left, its careful folds disturbed. In a message, "I know where you keep your heart." Vireth found her in the disused chapel before midnight. The sorcerer stood in the doorway like a shadow given permission to speak. "Little Viremont," the words were barely a whisper. Still sewing, still silent. How many years now? 9. She stepped closer. "Your brothers will die as wolves, Elira. I will see to it before dawn ever comes for you." Elira's hands clenched at her sides. Her mouth stayed shut. Her eyes burned. She went to the marshes at the darkest hour, harvesting wolfsbane with bleeding fingers while the sky pressed down like a burial shroud. In the fog behind her, a wolf followed, grey and enormous and silent, keeping pace without closing the distance. It did not growl, it did not hunt. It watched over her the way a brother would. Vireth did not come with soldiers, and she came with silence, the particular silence of a court that has already decided. The doors of the great hall cracked open at the 3rd bell past midnight, and Elira was pulled from the servants' corridor by hands she did not recognize. 2 guards, iron manacles already warm, as though someone had been holding them, waiting. They locked around her wrists with a sound like a door closing forever. The court was assembled. Every lord, every adviser, every wolf-bonded noble dragged from their beds and arranged in rows like witnesses to a hanging that had not yet been announced. Torchlight turned their faces into masks, orange and hollow and afraid. Vareth stood at the centre of the hall, and in her hands she held the 5th shirt. The wolfsbane threads caught the firelight like veins of mercury, and the court recoiled. Elira watched the recognition ripple through them, not of the shirt itself, but of what it meant. Poison, sorcery, something woven in secret by hands that should have been scrubbing floors. Found in the servant quarters. Vareth's voice carried the careful weight of someone delivering a kindness. Sewn with wolfsbane fibre, toxic enough to kill on contact. She held it higher, and a noblewoman pressed her hand to her mouth. "Your silent little Ash has been weaving curses beneath your roof, my lord. For how long, I wonder?" Kyle stood at the head of the hall. His amber eyes were wrong, too bright, too fixed, as though something behind them was being held at an angle that did not match the light. He looked at the shirt. He looked at Elira. "Explain yourself." 2 words. His voice was a blade pressed flat. Elira met his eyes. She held everything she could not say in that gaze. 9 years, 6 brothers, the weight of a promise that would shatter if she parted her lips even to breathe his name. Her fingers trembled in the manacles. Her mouth stayed shut. Vareth's hand moved at her side, a gesture so small it could have been nothing. A ring twisted, a finger curled. The air thickened. Kyle's jaw tightened, and something in his expression curdled from confusion into conviction. "She will not speak because she cannot defend what she has done," Vareth said softly, almost sadly. Kyle's fist struck the arm of his chair. Confined until dawn. If no defense is given, his voice fractured. He sealed it shut. The sentence stands. The guards dragged Elira down. The dungeon cell was narrow and wet and smelled of iron older than the fortress. So Elira waited until the footsteps faded. Then she tore the lining of her satchel with her teeth and pulled free the 6th shirt. Unfinished, desperate, stiff with dried blood from nights of stitching. She ripped threads from her own hem. She worked by the dying light of a torch stub wedged into the wall, her fingers splitting open along old scars, wolfsbane burning fresh channels into her skin. Through the barred slit above, shapes gathered, one by one. 6 wolves, grey and massive, pressing close to the walls of the yard below. Riven first, then Kalis. Thorns bulked beside Valor's leaner frame. Soren pacing. Irius, the youngest, pressing his muzzle through the gap in the iron gate until his breath fogged the stone near her window. They knew. They had always known. Hours later, Kyle came. Now he stood outside the bars with his hand on the lock, his face a ruin of something Vareth's magic could not fully paper over. His fingers shook. Elira rose. She crossed to him. She reached through the bars and pressed her scarred palm against his chest, against the heartbeat that was still, beneath everything, trying to find hers. His hand closed over her fingers. His eyes cleared for one shattered second. Then the fog returned. His grip loosened. He stepped back as though burned, turned and walked into the dark without looking back. Elira pulled her hand inside. She sat. She picked up the needle. At dawn they brought her to the yard in chains. The 6 wolves snarled against their handlers. The court watched from the gallery. Vireth stood beside Kyle's chair like she had always belonged there. Beneath Elira's sleeves, in the 6th shirt lay folded against her skin. 1 stitch remained. The executioner's blade caught the grey dawn light as it rose. Elira drove the needle through the last stitch with fingers slicked in her own blood. The thread pulled taut. The knot cinched. And the world cracked open. The silence that had lived inside her for 9 years shattered like ice on a frozen river. Not gently, not gradually, but all at once. A violence of release that tore through her chest and throat and teeth. She felt it in her marrow. She felt it in the ground beneath her knees. 9 years of swallowed screams, of bitten tongues, of words rotting behind sealed lips. All of it surged upward in a single, devastating breath. Elira opened her mouth. "Look at me!" Her voice was raw, wrecked, a blade dragged across stone after a decade in the sheath. But it carried. It rang across the yard like a bell struck in a cathedral, and every soul in that courtyard went still. The executioner's arm froze mid-swing. Guards stumbled. In the gallery, courtiers gripped the stone railing as though the fortress itself had shifted beneath them. Kyle's head snapped toward her. His amber eyes, still clouded, still fighting, went wide. Elira rose from her knees. Chains dragged. Blood ran from her fingertips onto the pale stone. She pulled the 6 shirts from beneath her sleeves and held them high. Silver-threaded, wolfsbane poisoned, woven with 9 years of silence and sacrifice and love so stubborn it had outlasted every cruelty designed to kill it. She threw them. The shirts unfurled like wings across the yard, each one finding its wolf with impossible precision. And the fabric settled over snarling fur, and the wolves screamed, a sound that was neither animal nor human but something caught between, something being unmade and remade in the same agonized breath. The first wolf's spine arched, fur split. Bones cracked and reformed. A man emerged from the wreckage of the animal, tall, gaunt, scarred along every inch of exposed skin, shaking violently as he drew his first human breath in 9 years. Then the second, the third, the 4th, 5th, 6th. Riven, Kalis, Thorn, Vila, Soren, Irius. The 6 Viremont brothers stood in the yard of Dreadmore, naked and trembling and human, and they formed a ring around their sister like wolves still, because the curse had taken their bodies but never their instinct, and their instinct had always been her. The court erupted. Vareth moved, and the sorceress rose from Kyle's side with a sound like tearing silk, and the mask finally dropped. Decay magic poured from her hands, black, rotting, smelling of grave earth and dying flowers, and it struck the ground between Elira and the gallery in a wave that split stone and withered the air. "You stubborn little ghost," Vareth hissed. I burned your kingdom. I cursed your blood, and still you crawl back. Elira faced her, steady, unbroken. You burned Vale Crest, Elira said, and her voice was stronger now, a blade finding its edge. You murdered my parents. You cursed my brothers, and you have spent the last fortnight poisoning the mind of the man beside you. She looked past Vareth to the court. She is no queen. She is the butcher of Vale Crest, and I am the witness she failed to kill. Kale staggered to his feet. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white, tendons standing. Elira watched the war behind his eyes, the fog fighting the fire, Vareth's corruption clawing against the bond that burned beneath it. He took one step toward Elira, then his knees buckled. Vareth smiled. He's mine, little princess. He has been since I touched his wine. Elira moved. She crossed the yard through the dying magic, through the cracking stone, past her brothers who parted for her like a gate opening. Chains still dragged from her wrists, blood still dripped from her hands. She climbed the gallery steps and knelt before Kale where he had fallen. His amber eyes found hers, half gold, half dark, fighting. "I can't," he rasped. "I can't see through it." Elira cupped his face in her scarred, bloodied hands. She had refused this. And for 9 years she had turned away from every pull, every ache, every moment the bond had reached for her, and she had denied it because she could not afford to be anything other than silent and invisible and alone. She was done refusing. Elira leaned in and pressed her mouth to the place where his neck met his shoulder. The pulse point, the claiming mark, the seal that no magic could counterfeit. And she bit down. The bond ignited. It tore through Kale like wildfire through dead wood, golden, savage, absolute. Elira felt it mirror through her own body, the joining of two bloodlines, two wills, two broken things finding the shape they made together. Kale arched beneath her hands. A sound ripped from his throat, not pain but release, the sound of chains breaking, of poison burning to ash in the blood. His eyes cleared. Fully, completely, amber and gold and his. Vareth screamed. The sorceress threw everything she had, decay and shadow and 9 years of accumulated corruption, and Kyle caught it on his forearm like a physical blow, rose to his full height with Elira at his side, and held. "You touched my mind," Kyle said quietly, and his voice was the low, controlled thing it had always been, but stripped now of everything false. "You poisoned my court. You tried to make me kill my mate." Vareth's magic fractured. She stumbled. The brothers closed in from below. Elira raised her hand, not in violence but in judgment, the gesture of a princess who had earned every ounce of authority through silence and suffering, and an endurance that empires could not outlast. "You hollowed out one kingdom," Elira said. "You will not hollow out another." Kale moved, and the brothers moved, and Vareth, the butcher of Vale Crest, the architect of ruin, the woman who had orchestrated the destruction of an entire bloodline and failed to account for the youngest daughter's unbreakable will, came apart beneath the combined force of the bond she could not corrupt and the wolves she could not keep caged. The silence that followed was not the silence of suppression. It was the silence of completion. Kyle found Elira in the aftermath, standing in the centre of the yard with her brothers around her and the dawn breaking red through the clouds for the first time in what felt like years. His hand found hers, their fingers laced, his scarred from war, hers scarred from wolfsbane, both still trembling. "Tell me," he said, "your name, your real name." Elira looked up at him, silver eyes, steady, full, and so she had been ash for 9 years. She had been silent, invisible, nothing. She had scrubbed floors and swallowed screams and woven poison into cloth with hands that bled every night, and she had done it without a single word of complaint or explanation or plea. She was done being invisible. "Elira," she said, "Elira Veramont, Princess of Vale Crest." She paused. The bond hummed between them, golden, living, permanent. "Mate of the King of Dreadmore." Kyle's hand tightened on hers. His forehead dropped to hers. His breath shook. Around them, 6 brothers stood in the rising light, scarred, human, free. The court watched from the galleries in stunned silence. The wolves beyond the walls had gone quiet, and Elira Veramont, who had not spoken for 9 years, smiled.